It's been a week since the momentous vote to leave the EU, and this is part 2 of our discussion panel. We're going to be looking a little bit more about what accountants and business owners are making of the decision. With me is Alice Neal, editor of PracticeWEB, who provide web services and content for accountants and accounting firms, and Chris Goodfellow, the managing editor of BusinessZone and UK Business Forums for business owners and entrepreneurs. We'll start with you, Alice. What's been the reaction from accountants and their clients?
It's been a mixed bag, really. I think we've worked with quite a lot of clients, really small firms to quite big ones. Some of them are very locally based, some of them have a much more international client base. So we've had some who've heard absolutely nothing, and then we've had some who have had lots of phone calls coming in and want to know how to react. So they're kind of coming to us. They want to be proactive, but perhaps not quite sure how to do it in the last week.
One thing we found on AccountingWEB has been the big split between smaller firms, perhaps in more rural areas. Nothing, deadly silence. Whereas larger, as you said, metropolitan firms are getting queries from, for example, EU clients saying, "Oh, am I going to be allowed to stay?"
So our difficulty now is how do we respond as a company to kind of support our range of clients, and whether we go into it in a huge amount of detail or whether we don't cover it. So pitching that is the big challenge that we've got now at PracticeWEB.
And Chris, in terms of BusinessZone, UK Business Forums, what have people been saying?
Yeah, so as you can imagine, there's been a sort of really heated debate in the run-up to the referendum and afterwards. We had one thread on UK Business Forums that ran to over 2,000 comments. I think the interesting thing has been that it's not just about sort of the business impact, but a lot of the conversations have been around a member's own political views, and in fact a lot of the small businesses said that they voted more on what they believed in rather than taking into account the impact on their businesses. I think since the fallout of the vote, and I think we were all pretty shocked at the result and weren't expecting it. So now it's a case of kind of scrambling to work out what the impacts will be, particularly around the currency in the short term, and in the long term, kind of whether there'll be any sort of downturn economically. So just kind of working through that now and really sort of scrambling to put plans in place to deal with that.
And in terms of financial advisors, Alice, what have they been saying?
The big concerns there have obviously been around currency. People with their investments and their pensions are kind of quite worried. So we had a lot of calls from our financial advisor clients saying that they've had a lot of calls on Friday morning, panicked people. So it's basically been a kind of reassurance mode, and we've been communicating with our clients about how they can communicate with their clients. So we're sort of a few steps down the chain.
Yeah, just picking up on a point you made there, Chris, about the surprise about the leave vote. I'd imagine that larger firms, larger companies would have had contingency plans in place. Have you found that with smaller firms that they're shocked and are coming on wanting to know how to react?
Yeah, I mean, so we cover businesses from 0 to 150 employees, so there's a kind of smaller end of the SME segment, and of all the entrepreneurs I've spoken to, none had any kind of tools in place to mitigate against currency risk, although as you can imagine, lots are looking into it now. So I think that's the first thing, and if they are making investments abroad, so I've spoken to, we've got a story sort of running in an hour or so that looks at those that had plans to either open new offices abroad or are paying staff that are abroad, and really have had to think about how they could scale that back now, because effectively their money's worth, or their investment's worth 10 to 15% less, depending on what happens. So it's kind of dealing with that planning of investments, but then the counter to that as well, there are opportunities here. So it's manufacturers that are saying, okay, can we get new clients, can we increase production runs and things like that. So it's a sort of two edges to it, really.
Yeah. So Alice, in terms of people phoning up PracticeWEB, have you got a sort of standard line that
we
you're
have
saying?
At the moment, I think in the first week, because it was a shock, and there's this immediate kind of, what's happening? Who can I talk to? Where can I find information? And which I think the whole country was doing, really.
Yeah.
So our thing has really been sort of saying, well, you've got to keep talking. If people are talking to you, it's probably best to have the one-to-one conversation rather than this blanket approach with advice at the moment. So we've really been looking at kind of reminding people how they can use their websites, how can they create content, how can they send out email newsletters, and just kind of being that backstop to help people talk to their clients and prospects.
And there's a big deal made before the vote about an emergency budget, any potential emergency budget that was likely to raise taxes and cut spending. What do you know about this?
Well, it was George Osborne's big kind of thing beforehand was we're going to have an emergency budget, etc., etc. Obviously, Cameron's gone, so it depends who's going to be the new leader of the Conservative Party, new Prime Minister. Theresa May is the front runner at the moment. She's actually come out and said, look, we're not having another general election and we're not having an emergency budget. So we don't know. I think we'd have the autumn statement at the end of November, start of December. I would, if I was putting money on it, I'd say we're probably going to have a bigger, beefier autumn statement / budget around then.
Going back to the sort of Gordon Brown days of, you know, the sort of second budget, as it were. One area that I think has interested a lot of small businesses trading with the EU was BATMOS. Could you talk a little bit about that, how that might affect things?
Yeah, so this is the way that small business, micro businesses that are selling into the EU pay VAT. So you have to now pay it based on the rate in the customer's country, and that's to put a very, very complicated issue into a tiny nutshell. But we've gone through sort of years of negotiations with the EU around how to do this and how to do it effectively and how to minimise the impact on micro businesses, and we were kind of getting to a point where it felt like we had quite a nice solution. We had the ability to file through VATMOS and deal with that. I mean, that's just kind of, this whole vote has kind of thrown that up in the air, because now we don't know the extent to which we'll have access to that. When we do leave, we won't be around the negotiating table either. So we've got kind of a lack of ability to impact that anymore. And you could be in this kind of nightmare scenario where a tiny business in the UK was trying to work out how to pay VAT in multiple EU countries, which is obviously a huge admin burden. So it's really kind of wait and see on that now. But I know, or I believe there was kind of meetings going on yesterday about that with HMRC.
Yeah, the EU VAT Action Group, I think Claire Yosa and colleagues had met with David Gork in the Treasury about this. There was a video, I think she issued this morning actually, saying that the Treasury had agreed with them about, I think, implementing or as sort of British policy to take to the EU of, I think, an £82,000 threshold and a soft landing for those businesses above that threshold. But as I say, leaving the EU may well diminish our voice and the impact it will have on this. So yeah, plenty of questions going forward.
That's it. I feel like we're going to be covering this, well, we are going to be covering this for years to come. So it's really, really just the start of the process.
Yeah, I've got plenty to write about.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Alice, Chris, thank you very much for your time. A lot of questions raised, and here on AccountingWEB, Business Zone, UK Business Forums and PracticeWEB, we'll do our best to keep you up to date with that. Thank you very much.